Hey, someone asked about doing these kind of sort of toy eyes in Nomad. I was going to try and write it up, but I think it's easy just to explain it with a video. So you can see this kind of has that vibe. Um, what are the important parts here? So one is obviously getting this sort of glitter look in the irises. Another is to get this kind of like a sheen across the bottom of the iris, or sort of opposite to the direction of the primary light source, to get this sort of like shiny highlights in the cornea, um, and to get this kind of like sort of glitter look. So if I pull this apart, the actual tricks to it are pretty straightforward. So if I turn off this and this, you can see this is what the surface is. This kind of like glow sheen is coming from the post-processing. So if I turn that off, you can see this is what it looks like in native mode. And if I turn on the wireframe, you can probably see a little bit better what is actually going on with this surface. So ultimately, I've got sort of a very strong like a kind of a dish shape for the iris, and I've painted lots of little dots. But also, you can see that there is a kind of material quality change between the iris and the whites over the eye, and that's using Nomad's ability to support PBR. So what that means is that if I go to the paint settings, you've got options for the color, you've got options for roughness, and you've got options for metalness. So what I've done is for the bulk of the eye, you'll get a preview of what I'm talking about as I change these sliders. So by default, the bulk of the eye is a fully white surface that is made very rough, or mildly rough, so that it has like a bit of highlights, but not really. So it's mainly like that, and it's not metallic. So this metalness slider, when it's at 0, it looks like, say, plastic, and if it's at 1, it looks metallic. That is clearer to see if I have a color. So if I go to, say, like a green, for example, and if I slide between the metalness being, say, 0 and 1, you can see it changes the surface property. That's even more noticeable if I make the material kind of shiny. So if I turn the roughness down, you can see that if the metalness is at 0, this is kind of going between, like, say, like a rough clay to, say, shiny plastic, and I can dial in something in the middle like that. But if I play with the metalness slider and I turn that all the way to 1, then now I've got this thing going between, like, say, super shiny metal and super rough metal. And to simulate that kind of look of an iris, so what that kind of core irisy look is you've actually got sort of like a bit of if you get like a magnifying glass and you get like sort of and you shine light through it, you'll get like sort of like highlighty patterns on what's behind the magnifying glass. They're called caustics. To simulate caustics in computer graphics generally involves very expensive rendering techniques. A trick that people worked out a long time ago, back in sort of the early Pixar days, is especially with irises, because that's such a core part of what makes eyeballs look like eyeballs, is if you put this kind of like sort of dish shape onto the iris and you give it like this kind of like sort of metallic looking sort of like broad highlights, that kind of looks like what you get in a real eyeball. So that's kind of the core of it. So what I've done here is I've used that as a base. In fact, what I might do, just because why not, is I'll try building this from scratch. So I'm going to go File, New. Yep. So here's the default sphere. I'm just going to delete that and start with a absolutely plain sphere, like, say, this guy. And let's make an eyeball out of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to define that sort of reversed dish shape and a pupil shape. Lots of different ways to do it. The one that I did previously, I was sculpting it. But I think what I might do here, I might try using booleans, because that, I think, is probably going to be a better way. So I'm going to clone this shape, and I'm going to look from sort of this angle. I'm going to pull this forward, and I'm going to intersect this until it looks kind of like a cornea. Actually, what I'll do even before that is I'm going to duplicate this shape, and I'm going to call this one shiny. And I'm going to just hide that for the moment, and I'll come back to that later. So now I've got this shape, and I'm going to sort of carve this shape out of it. So kind of assuming where this sort of intersects, that's the shape that I want removed. So the way booleans work inside Nomad is if this is invisible, but this is visible, and I'm going to go to here and choose them both, I'm going to go to Boolean and Boolean, and that will now subtract one shape from the other. So now I've got this kind of reversed dish shape. I think I want that to be even deeper. So what I might do, might scale the shape more this way to really sort of exaggerate that effect. So it's more like that. I'll do it again. So choose both shapes, Boolean, Boolean. And now I've got this kind of dish shape. That'll do for me for now. What I also need to do is to carve out a hole for the pupil, make that look really, really deep. So for that, I might make a cylinder. I'm going to turn it around, translate, snap 90 degrees to there, scale it down. So it's about the size of what the pupil should be, like say that. And I'm going to intersect it and do the same thing. I'm going to Boolean this out of the shape. So if the eye icon next to the shape is off, then that'll be carved out. So if I choose both these shapes, Boolean, Boolean, now I've got that carved out. So now I've got a pretty good base for the eyeball. Now I need to color it. I just remembered, going back to the reference for this, like a Beanie Baby reference, the pupil is enormous. So what I didn't do was make this big enough. So I'm going to scale it up quite large. So we have like a big, like creepy toy pupil shape, like that. Maybe even a little bit deeper. So it's going to be like that deep. Select them both, Boolean, Boolean. Okay, that's more of this pupil-y shape that I want to get. Cool. Now I'm going to paint it up. So I'm going to go to the paint tool, and I'm going to do this using layers just so it's easy to edit. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the properties for the whites of the eye. So I'm going to go to the paint menu, and I'm going to paint it white. I'm going to make it not metallic. I'm going to make it mildly shiny, but not terribly shiny. The reason being is that I'm going to use the other copy of the eye as a clear plastic shell on top of this to give it that sort of shininess. So with that being set as it is, I'm going to go paint all. So that's now set. I'm going to paint on a new layer now. So like using Photoshop, and I'm going to use this to paint the iris. So the paint properties, I'm going to start with something that's kind of like this blue cyan, like that. And I'm going to make it very metallic, and I'm going to dial in some roughness, like say that. So looking at that photo reference, or whatever reference that was, it looked like flecks of glitter that were sort of representing the iris. So I'm just going to go for that here. So now that I've got a brush, I can paint that in, but what I need is more detail on the surface. So I'm going to go to multi-res, and I'm going to subdivide this a few times. So I don't need to go that high, but that's pretty high, like that. I'm going to reset my paintbrush. Yep. Okay, so now I can paint like that. But obviously getting this to paint completely accurately on the shape will be kind of hard. So what I can do is I'm going to use symmetry. So I'm going to turn off mirror symmetry. I'm going to turn on radial symmetry. So I'm going to give myself more options here. So now you can see that as I paint, I'm painting in the round. So I can use this just to paint a base, try and get it a bit more accurate. I can paint a base for the iris, like that. And get really accurate down into there. That's not bad. So that's my base. I'm going to turn off wireframe. Then I'm going to try and paint some of those like sort of glitter, like different variations of glitter on top of this. So I'm going to go back to the paint menu, and I might paint, say, almost like sort of a silver glitter on top. But you can see that if I try to paint with this, it's hard to get sort of like little dots of glitter. There's a few ways that I could sort of cheat that. One is if I go to the stroke options over here, so go to stroke, I can use a wider stroke spacing. So now when I paint, if I even turn that way up, you can see I'm getting more dots like that. So that could work, that's fine. An even lazier option is to use the randomize tools down here. So if I turn on randomize, by default, this will just go crazy and paint so crazy splodges. I want to control how randomized this is. So I probably don't want to randomize the intensity. I don't want to randomize the rotation. I don't want to randomize the scale, but I want to randomize a bit of the translation. So at this default of 100, it's going to be quite a broad thing. It's also, it's still using that very wide stroke spacing, so I'm going to turn that right down again. So I get this kind of thing. So if this is at 100, you can see that it's going very, very broad. I might turn that the translation randomness down. So go to like say 9. That's better. It's a bit more controllable. That's a bit too tight, so I'm going to turn the stroke spacing up again. Up even more. Yeah, cool. And I'm going to just use this to paint in some flecks. And now I'm just going to do the same thing, but with different values of blue. So I'm going to go back to maybe a more saturated dark blue like that. And do more of a cyan blue. So I just want to mix this up so that it looks kind of quite, you know, metallic and made of glitter. Next thing I want to do is I've got to paint the pupil. So I'm going to put this on another layer because why not? We've got layers, they're fun to use. So I found to get that like a really deep, rich pupil so that it doesn't have any kind of shading on it. I found the trick is to obviously you go a color of black, but you can see in preview you still get this kind of like a highlight through the inside. So I'm going to play with these values until I get nothing at all. So if I turn the roughness up and leave the metalness high as well, it goes almost completely jet black, which is what we want. So I'm going to paint that into the pupil. I've still got randomness on, so I don't want that. I'm going to turn off randomness, make it slightly bigger brush, turn the stroke spacing down again, and now I'm just going to paint the pupil and make sure to go up the walls here until I get a nice rich dark pupil. That'll do. So that's the base of our eye. Now I'm going to go back to the outliner, and remember before I made a copy of the eye and I call it shiny. So I'm going to turn it back on again, and it's just a plain white sphere. But if I choose that sphere and you go to its materials, I'm going to change this from being an opaque material to a refraction material. And now we get this kind of like slightly kind of rough glass eyeball. If I want to like quickly make it look really sharp, I can press this paint glossy button. Now it's nice and clear. And then I can play with this index of refraction to change how much this is going to magnify the eye beneath. So I think maybe something like, say, 1.2 feels pretty good. And that, I think, is the basis of this sort of Beanie Baby eyeball. Other things you can do is you can play with the lighting a bit. So by default, Nomad just doesn't have any individual lights, but it has this environment light. So you can rotate that around to get different light qualities. Sometimes that's enough. But usually what you want for an eyeball is some like really clear, distinct ping highlight. So to do that, we're going to add an extra light. So I'm going to press this add light button. And rather than being a distant light, I'm going to change the type to a spotlight. And I'm going to move it so that it's sort of like above the eyeball and sort of pointing down at it. And that should give us this nice little pingy highlight there, which you can see. You can change the brightness to make it bigger or smaller and to throw more light over the rest of the eye. And that sort of helps to get... but the other thing that's important is you can see that while we're getting a nice highlight here, it's not really affecting the iris. And that's because even though we've got this outer shiny layer, which is clear, it's still casting a shadow. So we want to turn that off. So I choose that outer shiny layer, then go to its material properties and go down to its rendering properties. I'm going to turn off cast shadows. And now you can see we've got a highlight across the bottom here, which is what we want. So now that we've got that, I'm going to make a duplicate of this whole thing. So I'm going to maybe parent the shiny layer beneath the sphere, like that. Now I'm going to bring up the transform tools, go to the front view, like that, and I'm going to clone it and drag it sideways. You can see that this light is it's too narrow over only this one light. So I'm going to choose that light and maybe make its cone a bit wider if I can with, which one is it? That one. And I'll maybe move it more so it's centered like that. And you can see that's basically what we kind of wanted to achieve. So have the glittery iris space. It's got that inverse dish, which gives us this kind of like a highlight across the bottom. I've got a nice highlight, nice shiny cornea on top. That's the idea. Hope that helps.